everyone. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the next lecture. In this lecture, we are going to solve some problems. So, we are going to solve some problems to identify the type of the element. Okay. To identify your type of the element. Okay. So, there are some important points that you need to remember before attempting these problems. Okay. So, some important points. Okay. So the first one we have is in order to find if the element is linear or non-linear through its IV characteristics, it is important. For example, a linear element follows the equation of y is equal to mx. So it is basically an equation of a straight line which is passing through your origin. Okay. So if the IV characteristic of an element follows this equation, okay, y is equal to mx, then we can say that that particular element is linear. Otherwise, that element is a non-linear element. Okay. So second one we have is, in order to identify whether the element is your unilateral or bilateral. Okay. So if the element is following mirror symmetry, okay, if the element is following your mirror symmetry, it means that like the characteristic curve, the IV characteristic curve of the element is symmetrical on both the axes, that like on both the sides of the xy plane, then we can say that that particular element is a bilateral element. Okay, bilateral element. Otherwise, it is your unilateral element. Okay. The third one we have is to check in order to identify whether the element is active or your passive. Okay. So as we know that the active elements have the ability to deliver your power. Okay. So if the power of a element is coming out to be negative, okay, it means that the product of the voltage and the current is coming out to be negative on either side of the xy plane, then we can say that that particular element is your active element. Okay. If the power is coming out to be positive on both the sides of the xy plane, okay, then we can say that that particular element is a passive element. So these are some important points that you need to remember before attempting the problems. Okay. Let's start from the first problem. Okay. So the y-axis denotes the value of the current and the x-axis denotes the value of the voltage. Okay. Okay. So let's start from the first problem. Okay. So the y-axis denotes the value of the current and the x-axis depicts the value of the voltage. Okay. So this particular IV characteristic follows y is equal to mx. So it is basically a line which is passing through the origin. It means that this element is a linear element. Okay. Second one we have is, as you can see in the first quadrant, the value of the current, okay, in the first quadrant, the value of the current and the voltage are both your positive. So I into V, we are getting both have a positive value. Okay. So the power will be positive. It means that this element is absorbing power. Okay. In third quadrant also, the value of the voltage, okay, over here, and the current both are negative. It means that I into V gives us negative into negative and power is coming out to be your positive. It means that the circuit is also absorbing power in the third quadrant. It means that the circuit is a passive element. Okay, because it is not delivering any kind of power and we are not getting the value of the power to be negative. Okay. The third one, since the left hand side, okay, and the right hand side are symmetric and are following mirror symmetry, so we can say that mirror symmetric. Okay. So we can say that this particular element is your bilateral element. Okay. Bilateral element. Okay. So it is clearly, we can clearly see this particular element is linear. So we can clearly see this particular element is linear, passive and bilateral. Okay. So let's start with our second problem. Okay. So in this case also, this is the current. The y-axis depicts the value of the current and the x-axis depicts the value of the voltage. Okay. So since in this case, like this IV characteristic curve is not following y is equal to mx. Okay. So it means that the element is non-linear in nature. Okay. Secondly, since they are following mirror symmetry, as you can see, your right hand side, okay, and your left hand side, the curve in the first quadrant as well as the curve in the third quadrant are both symmetric to each other, are following mirror symmetry. It means that this particular element is a bilateral element. Okay, bilateral element. Okay. Third one we have is to check whether they are active or passive. Okay. So in the first quadrant, you can see the value of the current, or we are getting all the values of the current and voltage to be positive. Okay. So positive into positive, we are getting positive. It means that the power is positive in the first quadrant. Okay. So it means that this element is absorbing power. In the next quadrant, V into I. Okay. So V into I, we are getting both the values of the voltage and the current are negative. Okay. So we are getting a positive value. It means that the power is also, the element is also absorbing power in the third quadrant. It means that this particular element is your passive element. Okay. Passive element. Okay. So let's start with our third problem. Okay. So this is the y-axis depicts the value of the current. Okay. And the x-axis depicts the value of your voltage. Okay. So as you can see, this particular VI characteristics is clearly following y is equal to mx. So the line is passing from a straight line passing from the origin. So we can say that this particular element is linear in nature. Okay. Secondly, it is also we can also clearly see the second quadrant and the third quadrant. The characteristic curve in the second quadrant and in the fourth quadrant are symmetric in nature, are following mirror symmetry. It means that this particular element is also bilateral element. Okay. Next one we have is the values of the voltage and the current in the second quadrant. For example, we are getting our current to be positive in the second quadrant and voltage to be negative. Okay. So V into I gives us to be negative into positive. It means that we are getting a negative value. It means that the power is negative. So this particular element is delivering power. It means that this is a active element. Okay. So it is a active element. Okay. So let's start with our second problem. Okay. Fourth one. So in this case, we have, this is your current and voltage. Okay. So in this case also, we can see that it is not following y is equal to mx. Okay. Because it is not a straight line which is passing through the origin. So it means that this particular element is non-linear element. Okay. Non-linear element. The next one we have is as you can see, the second quadrant, okay, and the first quadrant are not following your mirror symmetry. Okay. Mirror symmetry. It means that this particular element is unilateral in nature. Okay. It is unilateral in nature. Okay. Third one we have is to identify. So in the first quadrant, we can see that all the values of the current and the voltage are positive. So it means that the element is absorbing power because the value of the power is positive in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, we can see the value of the voltage is negative. Okay. and the current also have positive values, okay, in the second quadrant. So it means that negative, positive, we are getting power to be negative. It means that this particular element is delivering power, okay, in the second quadrant. So it means that the element is active in nature, okay. So let's start with our next problem, okay. So in this case also the y-axis depicts the value of the current and the x-axis depicts the value of the voltage, okay. So over here, like as you can see, this particular curve or your IV characteristic curve is not following y is equal to mx, okay. So it is much similar to a equation of a parabola, okay. So this particular element is your non-linear in nature, okay. So it is non-linear in nature. Second one we have is it is also first and second quadrant, so it is also not following the mirror symmetry. The reason for that is because the IV characteristic should be like this, okay. So if the IV characteristic was drawn in the third quadrant, okay, then we can say that it is following mirror symmetry. But the IV characteristic is in the first and the second quadrant, and it is not following your mirror. So it is not mirror symmetric with each other. So it means that it is a unilateral element, okay. So next one we have is to check whether the element is active or passive in nature. So in the first quadrant we can see the values of the current and the voltage both are positive in nature, okay. So both are positive in nature. So it means that power in the first quadrant, the element is absorbing power, so P is positive, okay. So it means that in the second quadrant we can see that the current have a positive value, but the value of the voltage is negative over here. So it means that P, the value of the power is negative. It means that the element is delivering power. So it is basically a active element, okay. So I hope these problems helped you to understand the concepts thoroughly of what are like active elements, passive elements, and the various kinds of classification that we did in the previous lecture, okay. So that's all for today, guys. I will see you in the next lecture. Please do subscribe to the channel.